There's a house in Europe where the dinner table sits in one country and the sofa sits in another, and the people living there cross an international border just to answer their own front door. This isn't a joke or a tourist gimmick. It's how an entire town has functioned for centuries. The town is called Baarle, and it's actually two towns sharing one name, Baarle-Nassau, which is Dutch, and Baarle-Hertog, which is Belgian. Baarle-Hertog isn't one neighborhood next door to the Netherlands. It's 22 separate scraps of Belgium, scattered like puzzle pieces inside Dutch territory. Some of those scraps are barely bigger than a house and a garden. And inside at least one of them sits something even stranger. A small pocket of the Netherlands, completely surrounded by Belgium, which is itself completely surrounded by the Netherlands. A country inside a country inside a country. It's one of only a small handful of places like this anywhere on Earth. None of it was planned, none of it was designed by any government, ever, on purpose. It's the leftover residue of medieval land deals nobody ever bothered to clean up. And then one revolution froze the mess in place forever. Streets here have painted crosses in the pavement, marking exactly where one country ends and the other begins, sometimes crossing straight through a shop doorway, which raises an obvious question. How do you actually run a town, with police, schools, and trash pickup, when the border cuts through people's living rooms? To answer that, you have to go back roughly 800 years, long before either Belgium or the Netherlands existed as countries at all. In the 12th and 13th centuries, this stretch of land belonged to two competing feudal lords, the Duke of Brabant and the Lord of Breda. The two men swapped, sold, and inherited small parcels of farmland back and forth for generations, often one plot at a time. Nobody drew one clean line between their territories. Ownership was tracked parcel by parcel, based on which noble family happened to hold the deed. Over time, that produced a checkerboard. Brabant's land here, Breda's land there, sometimes switching every few hundred meters. For centuries, this didn't matter much, since both lords answered to the same larger authority, and peasants simply farmed whichever strip their family always had. Then, in 1830, the Belgian Revolution split the Netherlands in two, creating the separate country of Belgium. Overnight, that old checkerboard of feudal land claims stopped being a local curiosity and became an international border. Brabant's scattered parcels became Belgian, Breda's became Dutch, and they were still tangled together exactly as messily as they'd been for 600 years. Belgium ended up owning 22 disconnected pockets of land sitting entirely inside Dutch territory, collectively named Baarle-Hertog. The Netherlands, in turn, owned the town wrapped around and between all of them, named Baarle-Nassau. For the next century and a half, nobody fully agreed on exactly where every borderline ran. The precise boundaries weren't formally settled until 1995, when the two countries finally signed a treaty fixing every marker in place. Until then, the border existed in a strange legal fog, real enough to matter, vague enough to argue about. And it mattered constantly, because Belgium and the Netherlands didn't always agree on the rules. For decades, Dutch shops could open later on Sundays than Belgian shops could, or the reverse, depending on the year and the law. Alcohol sale hours, fireworks sale dates, and business closing times all differed slightly between the two countries. So business owners in Baarle did something wonderfully petty. They physically moved their front doors. Under Belgian and Dutch law alike, a building's nationality is determined by the country its front door opens into, not by where the rest of the structure sits. That single rule turned interior design into a legal strategy. If your shop's entrance sat 2 meters to the left on the Belgian side, you followed Belgian rules. Move the doorway 2 meters to the right, onto Dutch soil, and suddenly you were operating under an entirely different legal system. Homeowners whose houses straddled the line could technically choose which country to belong to just by deciding where to put the door. Small white crosses are still painted into the pavement across town today, marking the exact borderline as it cuts across streets, sidewalks, and driveways. House numbers here carry small flags next to them, a Dutch flag for a Netherlands address, a Belgian flag for a Belgian one. Even on the same street, two houses side by side can have completely different postal codes, phone systems, and municipal governments, despite sharing a garden fence. Emergency services have to know exactly which side of a painted line a call is coming from before they can even dispatch the right department. Police from one country technically have no jurisdiction the moment a suspect steps across a line painted on the sidewalk. For much of the 20th century, that made Baarle a minor haven for smuggling and rule dodging, since enforcement simply stopped at an invisible seam in the street. During periods of stricter alcohol or tobacco regulation on one side, residents would just walk into the other country's half of the same building to buy what they needed. But the strangest twist in this story isn't the shifting doorways or the painted crosses at all. It's what's hiding inside one specific Belgian parcel, sitting deep inside Dutch territory. One of the 22 scattered pieces of Baarle-Hertog, an ordinary-looking Belgian field, contains a small pocket of pure Dutch land inside it. That means there is a piece of the Netherlands surrounded by a piece of Belgium, which is itself surrounded by the rest of the Netherlands. Geographers call this a second-order enclave, or a counter-enclave, and it is genuinely rare. Only a tiny handful of these exist anywhere on the planet, and Baarle contains one of them without most of its own residents even realizing it. If you're standing in the wrong backyard here, you could cross two separate international borders just by walking from your shed to your garden gate. And this isn't some sealed-off museum curiosity. People live in these parcels, pay taxes based on them, and vote in whichever country's elections apply to their specific patch of dirt. Children growing up in a Belgian enclave attend Belgian schools, even when the nearest school physically sits closer inside the Netherlands. Mail delivery, waste collection, road maintenance, and building permits are all handled separately, parcel, by two entirely different national governments. Somehow, this actually works, and has worked for a very long time. The two municipalities eventually decided that constant confusion wasn't sustainable, and they built something unusual to fix it. In the 1990s, they constructed a joint town hall and tourist information center, deliberately positioned so the international border runs straight through the middle of the building itself. Visitors can stand in one room and step across a painted line on the floor into an entirely different country without ever going outside. Dutch and Belgian officials now coordinate directly on shared services, joint fire departments, shared tourism marketing, and coordinated road signage. It's an unusual model. Two municipalities, two national governments cooperating daily to run what functions in practice as a single town. That cooperation gets tested constantly by ordinary rule differences most border regions never have to think about at all. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic put Baarle's split identity under real, sudden pressure. Belgium and the Netherlands imposed different lockdown rules on different timelines with different limits on which businesses could stay open. For a while, a café on one side of a painted line could legally serve customers, while a café a few meters away across that same line had to stay shut. Some residents reportedly crossed from their Dutch half of a building to their Belgian half just to sit in a room where different rules applied. It was the clearest modern proof that lines drawn by feudal nobles 8 centuries ago still carry real, enforceable legal weight today. None of this exists because anyone in Brussels or Amsterdam designed it that way on purpose. It exists because two medieval landowners kept trading small parcels of dirt, and nobody ever consolidated the mess before a revolution turned it permanent. Baarle survived by doing the opposite of what most border disputes do. Instead of fighting to simplify the line, both sides simply learned to live inside the mess. Roughly 9,000 people live across both halves of Baarle today, a small town that still requires 2 mayors, 2 town councils, and 2 sets of national laws running in parallel. Tourists now visit specifically to see the painted border crosses, treating a centuries-old land dispute as a walking trail. Local shops sell postcards showing the exact patchwork map of all 22 enclaves, because even longtime residents struggle to keep track of where every line actually runs. The town's own tourism office jokes that visitors should bring a map, because a phone's GPS will confidently name a different country every few steps. Zoom out far enough, and Baarle stops being a quirky travel story and starts looking like a warning. Every national border on every map looks solid, permanent, and deliberate, drawn by careful hands with a clear purpose in mind. Baarle proves that assumption wrong in the most literal way possible, by cutting straight through somebody's kitchen. Most borders were never actually engineered from scratch. They accumulated, the same way Baarle's did, through centuries of small, unrelated decisions nobody expected to matter later. A land swap here, an inheritance there, a treaty signed to end one unrelated war, decades or centuries before anyone imagined passports or international law. Then, at some later moment, a revolution or a war or a peace treaty comes along and freezes all of that accumulated mess into something that suddenly counts as permanent. Nobody chooses this. It simply happens, the way it happened to medieval farmers who had no idea their family's old land trades would someday require crossing a border to reach their own garden. Most places just don't experience that accumulated mess quite so visibly, all at once, painted directly onto their own front doorstep. Baarle is what happens when the invisible arbitrariness underneath ordinary borders becomes impossible to ignore. You can't paper over a border that runs through your living room. You have to live inside the contradiction directly, every single day. And the strange part is that living inside the contradiction turned out to be manageable once both sides stopped trying to erase it. Baarle didn't survive by picking a side, merging into one town, or fighting over the disputed scraps of land. It survived by building shared infrastructure directly on top of the mess. One shared building straddling the line, one shared tourism office, one shared understanding that the border was never going away. That's a strange kind of stability, built not on resolving a contradiction, but on simply organizing daily life around it. Every time you look at a clean, confident line on a modern political map, it's worth remembering that somewhere, that same kind of medieval leftover might still be sitting underneath it, just better hidden than Baarle's. Most borders got lucky. Whatever mess created them got smoothed out, redrawn, or renegotiated before anyone had to build a café that legally exists in two countries at once. Baarle just never got that smoothing over treatment. And by the time anyone seriously considered fixing it had become far stranger than simply living with it. So the painted crosses stay in the pavement, the flags stay mounted next to house numbers, the counter-enclave stays tucked inside its enclave, inside its country, inside its neighbor. And somewhere in Baarle tonight, someone is walking from their kitchen into their own living room and crossing an international border to do it. That's the real lesson underneath the postcards and the painted crosses. A border only feels permanent right up until you actually have to live inside one room at a time.